to pitch or not to pitch webinar. So we've got Karen from Reed Smith. I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves in a second. Matthew Fuller from White and Case, Keith from MD Communications, and Evan Morgan from DAC Beechcroft. Matthew, you're in the top left-hand corner. Do you want to briefly introduce yourself?
Thanks, Christopher, and hi to everyone. Yes, I'm Matthew Fuller. I'm the head of business development for Americas and EMEA at White and Case. I've been here for 10 years now, but spent the vast majority of my career in legal marketing, 31 years now. And I have a particular passion for pitching. So this is rather an appropriate meeting for me to be at. And I've just written a book, published last week on the very subject.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matthew. Evan.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Evan Morgan. I'm the head of bids for DAC Beechcroft, which is an international law firm that specializes in insurance, health, and real estate primarily. I lead a 12-strong bids team, which focuses on competitive tenders only, the ones where we're formally scored and evaluated against our peers, as opposed to sort of the informal business development opportunities, which another team in the firm takes care of. My team's made up of experienced professionals who've either spent a career in law firms or held senior positions outside the industry. And our job is to robustly challenge every opportunity we see to ensure that we're pursuing the right ones and bring a sales-oriented sort of commercial approach to all aspects of the bids process. I've been with the firm for just over 10 years now, and before that, I worked in commercial finance.
Brilliant, thank you. And Karen.
Hi, I'm Karen Hoy. Nice to be with you today. I'm at Reed Smith, where I've been here for about 9 years. My career started in the Big Four. That's where I got my marketing chops, both at Deloitte and at EY. And then I moved into both BD and practice management roles at law firms. So I too come to the proposal process with the commercial or the business approach. A lot of our decisions have a business aspect to it, not only the actual opportunity that we're proposing on, but the terms and conditions and the issues around the challenges that a particular client or a particular type of work we might face. And I too actually like pitching, so happy to be here today.
Brilliant, thank you, Karen. And Keith.
Hi, Keith Hardy. I spent 15 years in large corporates before joining law firms. I've spent 15 and 16 years in large law firms. I'm more of a generalist, so I've headed up marketing and business development teams within those larger international law firms. And what I've also done is I've got involved with quite a lot of legal startups, sort of startups being developed out of law firms. And in the process of doing that, I've got involved in trying to drive pipelines and really introduce that kind of more of a sort of startup approach to the way in which you manage business development. And obviously within that, pitching and proposals and driving that process has been a big part of that process.
Fantastic, thank you. So just so that everyone knows, I started off my career in the legal sector running business development for Simmons & Simmons. So I was running the sort of pitch team there. It's been a while since I've worked within a law firm, but I spend almost every day of the week working with firms and with individuals like our panelists today. So I'm really excited about this conversation because it's really hard to say no, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Just really quickly, I guess we need to be, I think, really clear about what we mean by a pitch. And our experience is that different firms have different meanings for pitches. Evan, I think you were sort of clear about the things that were on your list of things that your team tackles.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we look at those formally evaluated tenders, so the ones that you get in, it's an ITT or a RFP or an RFQ or whatever three-letter acronym they choose to opt for at the time, that's going to be scored, evaluated by a procurement team, a legal team, a HR team, whatever they're using on the other end, and they're comparing apples with apples, aren't they, against their competition, to see which is the best fit for their panel or for their project or for their opportunity, whatever it might be. So that's what my team looks at, that sort of formally structured tendering opportunity that may or may not have various stages, presentations involved, contract negotiation at the end of it, whatever it might be. So
brilliant. And sorry, how big did you say how big your team was?
So there's 12 in my team. So we're quite a small team for the size of the firm, really. So that bid no bid conversation becomes quite important, because the goal for us really is to avoid being a document production factory. We can't just chase every tender. We have to maximize the team there and get the profitable revenue in, basically, at the end of the day. And you don't do that by pitching for everything. You've got to choose the right stuff and make sure that it's in line with the strategy of the firm as well. So it's always an interesting dynamic, I think, for a good biz manager, because they have to have a bit of a chameleon aspect of their personality to draw out those sort of conversations without annoying the lead, so they can continue to work with them, even if perhaps ultimately they might be overruled by a clearinghouse on a recommendation as to whether they should bid or not. So
brilliant. Cool. Thank you. Karen, you've got an even smaller team for what I guess is an even bigger organization. How do you define pitches and what's in your bailiwick and what's not?
There's 4 of us, so we are quite busy, and certainly understand and agree with the idea that not everything is something that we ought to chase or work on. We are basically a global team, so the complex proposals or the panel proposals, generally either regional, meaning all of US or all of Europe, UK, or global, and cross-practice are the areas that we focus on exclusively. And there are 2 of us who take the leads on the decisions on the, if you call it go, no go, yes or no, whatever acronym, euphemism you want to use. But we also, because there's so few of us, we can get senior management team attention quickly, because generally we're running down all the traps through a lot of different issues, and then taking to management, here's the good, the bad, and the ugly, and let's decide what we're going to do. And then that way we get an answer usually pretty quickly. But we too are pretty nimble. Somebody is covering different times of the day, because we have, we span offices from Hong Kong to San Francisco.
Brilliant, thank you. And Keith, how do you define a pitch?
Well, I think it's a moot point in every firm I've worked in. There's been various shades of grey, but I think one of the things that I'd say is that if pitching's very standalone, if it's just the pitch team is sort of managing things on their own and aren't connected in with the rest of the effort, what you end up with is huge amounts of pressure on the pitch team to make decisions about go, no go, that don't have much of a criteria against them, and you create an awful lot of issues within the pitch team as they try and sit in front of a partner who's desperate to go for something when they've got really very little to go on in terms of persuading that partner whether they go no go. And I think what you're trying to do with most with the broader team is try and create the pipelines and try and create the steps that lead up to that. To lead up to that moment, and have the right conversations much earlier on about what do we actually want, what's our positioning, what are we, how are we taking the client through the conversation, how are we building a relationship with the client, so that we're not just receiving an RFP and providing a document back. We're actually building a relationship. So I think, to me, I think it's always going to be a little bit grey about what's a pitch and what isn't, and a lot of the pitch team effort is actually spent on the way that the client asks for what the client's asking for. Effectively, it becomes much more complicated in some cases than it does in others, and some of the decision making is much more difficult in some cases than it is in others. But actually what you're really trying to do is create a continuum that means that the whole firm is all going in the same direction, and the partners know what pitches they should be going for and what pitches they shouldn't before they ever get to that point. And I just think law firms and law firms in my experience really, but they tend to be pretty poor at deciding what they want to go for before the pitch lands. So it tends to be a question that's only asked once they've got the RFP. I'm sure Matthew's got a few chapters on this as well. I would imagine that he could run through.
No, absolutely right, Keith. And I agree with everything you've just said. I think just to answer Christopher's point, the way we look at it is anywhere where there is a competitive opportunity to win work, and so we do around 3,500 pitches a year globally. We have a central team like Karen's and Evan's, a global team. It's a small team, there's about 6 people in there, and they just do the big panels. And that only constitutes about 100 or so every year. The other 3,000, whatever, 400, thank you very much, Krista, are done by our BD team, spread all over the world. And that's actually where we have more of the tension, to be honest with you, and where the whole go, no-go thing is actually really important. You know, if we don't get this right, our BD teams can very quickly and easily get swamped, and then are not able to do anything else as well, which is of course not good. So there are big issues around this, and I'm aware, certainly from people I've spoken to, this is a big tension amongst most law firms.
Absolutely, and I guess that's why one of the fantastic things about this sort of webinar is there's a number of people who've signed up to come and listen to us tell them what the silver bullet is. So no pressure. So I guess, Karen, you mentioned that you worked at Deloitte first. Matthew, you've been writing your book around strategic tendering and professional services. Evan, you started off in, I think you said, financial services. What can we bring from those other sectors, do we think? Are law firms, Keith, I think you maybe said that law firms are particularly bad at this. Is that really the case? Karen, what?
Sorry, I think what I was saying was that they're bad at positioning rather than and bad.
Oh, okay.
So it's the bit before pitching. I think they tend to be. Sorry, Karen. I just.
No, I mean, I think so. Law firms are businesses, just like Deloitte or any of the consultancy firms. So they're businesses, and there are business decisions to make, and they're also generally partnerships. And I think one of the distinctions that's different, even though the other accountancy firms and consulting firms could be partnerships, in effect, they're much more structured like businesses, almost like a, sort of a global financial type of business. So the fact that the law firm is a partnership and that the partners are owners, I think is one of the key differences. And then you have to put into that context. So you've got the business, the partnership owner, and then we who are not owners and not partners, who are, in a sense, some of these very strategic calls, and we usually want to keep our jobs. So employment is kind of one of my key goals every day. So when you approach this conversation, I think you have to have a foot in both places, understanding the world in which you live and in the world in which you work, and then really to have your facts together and in place so that you're able to be the advocate for really a lot of different answers and a lot of different ways to go, but always with a path to what is the way you're trying to lead the conversation.
I would say absolutely right, Karen. And I remember a partner at one of my former firms, which will remain nameless, when I once said to me, the thing I like the most about this firm is that nobody can tell me what to do. And there lies the point Karen was making.
Is that why you're no longer there?
Very good. No, it is absolutely true, and I think the consultants and the big accountants firms do have that bigger structure behind them, that more formal structure, and therefore it enables them to have more robust frameworks around this, which allows them to work their way through this. And in fact, in my book, if I may, I split it into 4 approaches that we'd found. You know, from the extreme, which I call command and control, where but basically it's very, very strict. You know, it only clients of a certain size or matters or projects of a certain size would be allowed. You know, would be allowed to tender for. Then there's some that have a sort of like a committee. So, you know, everything has to go up to a committee to review, a bit like a sort of conflicts committee that I'm sure some of these law firms have, similar sort of thing. Then you go down to what I call BD-led approach, which is where, you know, we try to kind of what I think Karen is sort of saying, how you can flex things a bit. You have a range of questions you can ask to try to at least get a conversation going before you hit you start the submission. And then the last 4th one is free for all, where there's absolutely nothing in place. And those are broadly the 4, and most law firms have either the BD-led approach or a free for all, is the truth of it.
I think that sort of plays to that point as well that I was making about trying to get the conversation before the RFP lands. What you're trying to do is make sure that you've got some basis for the decision. So when you have a free for all, at least everyone's at least had a conversation before they have a big bit of work sitting in front of them to make the decision against, and trying to just gradually edge firms towards having a positioning and having sets of work that they're really going after is kind of an essential part of the process.
I think as well, I mean, Keith's absolutely right. One of the things I often say is that bids are not business development. They are the end product of really good business development. But I think as well, the standing of the bids team and how the firm itself uses them or treats them is quite important, and how they then perform within that. So that if there are governance structures in place to decide whether or not to take the tender forward, the bids managers should be able to use them. And if they have the credibility and the experience to have those conversations and make those recommendations and then deliver, then that grows over time, and the standing of that team within the firm increases, becomes more positive, and the recommendations they make you know, have greater weight. Of course, that's intrinsically linked with their performance. So the people that you've got in your team have got to deliver, and they've got to be right more often than not, particularly if they're suggesting chasing something that may not be obviously a bid straight away, or equally suggesting turning down something that everyone wants to go for. So the makeup of that team, the behaviors of that team, and how they're supported by the firm go a long way towards that pitch no pitch process as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I really agree. That's really well said, because I think too often BD teams get caught up in having to please a particular partner or leader. And our role really is, in a sense, we work for the firm, but we're having an eye toward a lot of different issues, which could be conflicts, okay, in terms of other work. It could be the pricing. It could be the fact that this is a better opportunity for a niche firm than for a global firm, or it could be that we're not going to propose on all aspects of the practices, that we're going to go for the ones where we have a particular strength, where we're going to get good rates, where we have some relationships, where there's a competitive advantage for us, and being able to sort through all of that and provide the documentation for the acceptance of those decisions is really key to having, kind of people with some gray hair or who've been kicked around their career quite a bit, and have the scars to show it, because that's what it's going to take to get that kind of credibility with senior leadership.
One other thing which I think is kind of unique in law, or possibly not unique, but it's unusual, is the issue around conflicts and making choices. There's a lot of practice areas where those choices to bid or not to bid can rule you out of
significant other work
on the table, or aren't on the table at the time. So having somebody in the bids team who can understand what the implications of going for this are, and you can kind of see that in a strategic context, whilst at the same time keeping an eye on the fact that we've got people possibly sitting underutilized who are essentially a cost on the business, but so we want to use them. But that kind of strategic balance, looking at what we're potentially ruling out by going for this, what teams are potentially going to be sitting idle if we don't go for it. Those sorts of things are actually they're difficult, complex decisions in a quite high pressured environment. So the quality of the people that you have in those to manage those conversations is really critical. And the more that you can try and make everyone understand the context of those decisions, the more effective they're going to be.
I think that's sort of really interesting, and I guess leads on to where I wanted to take us next. Just before we do that, what we were going to do was put up a quick poll to see how many people on the call are running a formal go, no-go decision. And then if you do, what are the main aspects that you're looking at as part of your decision making? So we'll give you a few seconds to vote on that. Just as panelists, I'm afraid you don't get a choice. You don't get to vote. We don't count. I think one of the things, just whilst people are completing the poll, I guess this whole thing of we have really finite resources, and the previous webinars, what's been really clear is that actually finding really good talent, I think everybody really struggles with. So growing our teams isn't really an option. And as a result, we need to focus them on those things that they can give the sort of biggest reward for. And if you're a really small team, such as Karen or yours, Evan, and I guess Matthew's sort of the same is true. Yeah, that focusing, deciding which ones we have time for and can do well is clearly a really important thing. And that's, I guess, what I'd like to sort of explore a bit next. So I don't know whether all the results are in yet. Charlotte, can you put up the results when you get a moment? So okay. So nearly 60% don't have a formal go, no go sort of strategy. Interesting. So I guess we'll leave those up. If we could, what do you, Matthew, within White and Case, look at to determine whether your central team is going to help?
I think the core thing is the relationship. Initially, the first thing is the relationship. What sort of relationship we have with that entity. That's number one thing. And then I think we're getting much better at trying to be more data driven about this. So then digging into the work, if we have done work, what that work's been, how profitable that work is, and also critically, where that work is and what the opportunity is to broaden that to other parts of the business. So those are the key things that we would look at for a panel, as you've just said. If I could just remark, if I may, just on your point, you know, generally about team size and we're talking about panels here, but just quickly on all the 3,400 other ones where this is still a big issue. There are other, we have, if I can bring up Pinnacle, we have bought Pitch Perfect, and that is one way is to have an automated system that can help with the efficiency. It can also critically allow self-service, so that what we can do is, rather than saying no, which, as Karen has very articulately said, is not easy in a law firm environment, you can say, okay, you're not going to have a BD person supporting you. It's all on the system. Get your associate or your assistant to do that for you. And that's an approach I know the accountants have been and consultants have been employing for some time, and we are trying to promote a lot more.
Brilliant. And so, Evan, I think you have a formal scoring matrix, is that right?
Well, no, not quite. We got rid of the formal scoring matrix. It might be the other way of thinking of it. So in the past, we did previously have a scoring matrix that sort of determined whether or not this bid was one we would pursue or otherwise. But strangely, I don't know how it happened, we always seem to score the required score in order to tender. Odd. I don't know what was going on. A lot of bids ended up being strategic for some reason. So we got rid of that. And we replaced it with a proper bid, no bid discussion at the outset of every single tender that we look at. And the sort of starting position for my guys, us as biz managers, is maybe slightly controversial, but it's that actually this isn't a bid, convince us that it is a bid, which might seem strange, but what that helps do is avoid that automatic confirmation bias that you were seeing, for example, with the scoring matrix. It's really easy to claim that a bid is strategic, or it's going to get us in front of the client, or any number of a host of other reasons. But actually, we say, well, hang on, let's explore those questions properly. How does it link in with strategy? In what respect is it going to get us in front of the client? I mean, if you don't win it, do people remember losing bids? I don't believe they do. And if they do remember a losing bid, is that a good thing? There's that sort of question. So what we tend to do is, at a high level, obviously there's nuance in every conversation and detail, but very broadly speaking, we look at a kind of 3 questions. Can you win it? Is it deliverable? And is it profitable? And the answer to all 3 of those has to be yes. If the answer to any one of them is no, then we shouldn't be pursuing it. And actually this morning, very apropos, we had a very spirited debate around that over a client where we're actually a panel incumbent. So the automatic position would be, well, we should be bidding for it. When you delve into the detail, the revenue we expected based on what they promised the last time wasn't there. The revenue we did get wasn't profitable. And the client was cashing in on the value-added services arrangements that were in place through contractual requirements. So we weren't making money out of them. So the starting position there was not to bid. So we all had to take a step back and say, right, what is it why is this client worthwhile to us? If we're going to go for it, how are we going to ensure that we don't end up in a position where it's costing us more money than before? And is there a plan we need to build around that? So those sort of conversations are what we do. And by making it a stop initially, then we're forced to focus on the USPs. We're forced to focus on the win strategy. We're forced to consider our competition as well. If we're an incumbent, how will they unseat us? If we're not an incumbent, how are we going to unseat them? And it's avoiding the things like, because we're the best lawyers, because we're the leaders in the market, all those cliches, sales things, So
yes,
absolutely agree. Then that is the approach that we would take. We do use the matrix. We use a scoring system. We don't let the lawyers be part of the scoring. Maybe that's one of the challenges. That's why the scores always were the way they were. We control that scoring. But generally now, it was something that we used a couple of years ago when we were really starting down the path. Now it's really just the outline of the process. But we do look at, if it's an existing client, we look at the profitability, we look at the type of work, we look at the kinds of work, where and how. We look at what we refer to as the terms and conditions or the outside counsel guidelines, because there are some businesses now which have been changing the criteria and the agreements, and sometimes they're agreements to which we cannot agree, or we have to take exception, and we want to alert the client of that exception right away. And if that's a deal buster, well, there we go. I mean, there are certain issues that are just not things that we can sign on to, or we can have that area that's carved out. We look at a lot of the reputational areas, as you say. We look at the damage that it could do to other existing clients and what we're saying. We have pulled back quite a bit on the freebies, the value-added services. The idea of the secondment for everybody, or that they get however many secondees they want for as long as they want. Well, that's not a good thing for the lawyers either, in terms of their career development. So there's a very complex conversation. I think, Evan, you outlined that well. And so the decision, when you gather all that information together and you're not really in a emotional place, you can just state the facts and it all rises up. And it's a pretty, if there's a set of conflicts that have to be resolved, those are things for the lawyers to resolve. And if they can't be resolved, well, then it's a pretty clear answer, and nobody has to take any offense at it.
Do any work.
And there's two other aspects. One which Keith mentioned earlier on. The bid itself shouldn't be looked at in isolation. It should be part of a wider process with the BD activity and the relationship aspects informing it massively. And if that aspect is missing, there's got to be a big question mark over whether or not it's winnable. The other side then is your own data in terms of bids team, trends around pricing, trends around win rates, behaviors of competitors in that particular market. Ideally, you're keeping track of those. And if you've got a client listening debrief function, they're feeding in that intelligence to that decision as well.
And also looking ahead, we try to look ahead. And so looking 6 months ahead as to when these panels are going to be likely to be reviewed, so that you aren't scrambling around, when the RFP hits the desk, trying to do many of the things that we just talked about. But you're saying, right, this is going to come up in about 6 months' time. What's going on? How are we doing? Is this? Let's start having the conversations now about this, because this is going to be upon us soon.
And proactively managing that relationship, as Keith said.
Yeah. And I think there's actually possibly now two types of pitching going on. One's actually around the kind of RFP pitching, where you're really just you're selling general services, but there isn't a specific work necessarily associated with it. That you're never going to sell people really unless they've got relationships. They're buying people, so they need to know those people to some extent to be able to make that purchase. But the other type is, which I think is increasingly happening within law, is the kind of solution. It's a solution that you've built and you've designed. But again, unless you really understand the needs of the client, you're not going to be able to just pitch that separately. You've got to, there's stages that you go through, and you have to understand what the needs of the client are to be able to say this is the solution that you need. So I think I think in any case you need to make sure that there's been proper conversations with the client, and you build the relationships before you get to the RFP. It just happens that the pitching process is kind of where the rubber hits the road or whatever, where you kind of where you have a moment of clarity in which you can check, has the rest of the process worked very well, and are we actually following this process very well. One other thing that I thought was actually quite staggering, actually, on this survey, is that so few people are looking at reputational risk. I would have thought in the last few weeks, one of the things that we have learned within professional services is that that's a pretty important thing to be considering. And again, that's the sort of thing that it's pretty hard if you don't have a really good team looking at go-no-go decisions, and a team that can really, look commercially and strategically. There's going to be a lot of mistakes that firms will make that will come back and bite them. Very incredibly tough decisions, actually. So, 3 or 4 years ago, incredibly tough to say, I'm not sure that we want to be working for these people. But now, clearly, quite different views being taken. So I think it's actually quite a surprisingly
low.
In
yes.
that survey.
The other, so I completely agree with that. The other bit that I've never really understood how firms do it, and we talked about our ability to deliver, and just how you factor in capacity and how much spare capacity there is in your firm, and whether it's just a case of, do you know what, we win the work and then we work it out afterwards, and maybe that's what you have to do, Keith, on those sort of panel appointments where you haven't really won any work, you've won the right to win work. But I don't think, has anyone got any? Karen looks as if she's about to jump on that one.
I feel like it's the question of the hour right now, but just like when you go to the petrol station, the gas station, the gas prices are going up a couple times a day here, right? So just like those lawyers that are the cryptocurrency specialists or the data privacy, data breach, it's just a matter of the price. It's capacity. You can expand your capacity by expanding the price. So you don't have to turn down the work, but the work may cost more than a commodity practice would, for example. Okay, just because they're in a different kind of demand. So there is that within the you can't invent. You can't expand the assembly line because they are human, but they do come at a price, and that's okay. You can raise your price. So that's one point I wanted to make. But the other two, we have some geographical differences, I think, too, that impact the decisions about the go no go or the kind of client that it is. And one of them in the U.S. in particular are issues around diversity. We've been dealing with that now for about 4 years with the Mansfield, and I think the UK is in its first year, moving into the second year of adoption on Mansfield. So there are a lot of criteria there, and a lot of sort of penalties coming toward firms if they don't meet specific criteria. That's starting. Those carrot and sticks are starting to hit. In Europe and the EU, I think it's really more around energy, green, green companies, and ESG that you're seeing a lot. And I think ESG is going to become even more important in this in our new global environment. So there's a change in complexity, the nature of our business, and the nature of our business decisions too.
And I think that also one of the things that I think we've spoken about as a group before is the fact that panels the pitching is getting more complex and more the requirements that clients are placing they're essentially legal services, professional services are being more and more influenced by purchasing,
procurement.
and procurement, who are basically saying this is the way to manage these suppliers and to get the evidence that you need, and they're requiring a lot more data and a lot more information from the firms that they're asking to pitch. So I think that's making it a much more complicated and difficult thing. And you've got things like the Mansfield requirements, and you've got these essentially you've got. I'm working for a startup that's basically using AI to evaluate ESG credentials and performance of law firms, and providing that back to clients that are managing pitching. So you've got all these sort of effectively massive data points which clients are using as almost hygiene factors, and that's creating a huge amount of pressure into students.
It is, and as you said, Keith, the demanding, what's really shifted in the last couple of years is the evidence. The questions, they raised the questions a few years ago, but I think a lot of you get away with one-line answers. They now actually want hard data, hard evidence. And so one other sort of top tip, if we're sort of looking at those, Christopher, for people, which I would give, is the importance of internal relationships between the central team in particular and all the guys dotted around the place who can help you with that data. So if you have a diversity team, if you have an ESG team, but your pricing team, your finance team, all the rest of it, and they are absolutely critical that they're very tight, because they are, as we've just heard, increasingly in demand.
Yes.
That complexity.
Sorry,
no, I was going to say that complexity, which Keith is absolutely right, has not been aligned with an expansion in the timelines to turn these tenders around. So where you got a 2-week tender 3 or 4 years ago and one person could turn it around, you're now sticking 2 or 3 people on it because of the level of complexity, which has a knock-on effect in terms of capacity, opportunity cost, free earning cost, and so on. So,
and I guess there's a piece about being able to gather that data, store it, and having it at your fingertips, which I know, Karen, you've been sort of working at.
The perfect commercial. We and one of the ways that the central team has come, into the fore is we manage the frequently asked questions for all of those proposals, and those frequently asked questions do change even within a year, so that we have the content management function is something that our team also manages. We're the source for a lot of the answers of those questions anyway. Reaching out to the various parts of the organization and then having them approved. And so if it's a pitch that the BD team is doing for sort of one-off litigation matter or whatever, but they have some of these answers that they need, they can source it themselves through Pitch Perfect. Or they can, come to us and say, I have this kind of question. And sometimes if we get that question, we know the first time we get the question, we're going to get it again, probably in another couple of weeks. So we use that as our content management process.
Brilliant. Just, I'm sort of conscious that we're sort of about 3/4 of an hour in. What advice would you give people to help them say no? I guess, Evan, you've talked a bit about that. Do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to considering the facts of the tender that are in front of you. What is it that you're actually being asked to do? What is it you're being asked to deliver? And does that match up what you as a firm really want to do? As opposed to, look at this opportunity that potentially is worth loads. Is it worth loads? What goes into developing it into that very juicy number that's on the procurement, the RFP form, which I'd love to do an exercise in retrospectively working out how much that is actually realized. So it's facts deliver them, you got to be a neutral argument. You know, you're asking, why is it we're doing this ultimately, and what is going to win this, not how quickly can we get this done. Let's put that in there. It's stopping, thinking, considering. It's the same with any tactical commercial decision, really. So,
Matthew, what advice would you give?
Well, it's pretty similar to Evan, actually. It's to have data, actually, because particularly with lawyers, they want to see the way their minds are trained. They want to see empirical evidence, and you need to have data. And of course, it's not just data for data's sake. You need to be smart about it, and therefore you do need to plan that conversation. You know, quite smartly, even if it's you know, ultimately going to be quite a short conversation. It needs to be just thought through very smartly.
I agree with everything that, you know, said, Matthew and Evan, because it is the data, it is the facts. You, again, mindful of that these are people who are owners and who don't want their judgment challenged. Sometimes approaching, and I've had my share of meetings that I am dreading holding and expecting the worst. So I think you do have to go through the entire conversation in your mind and be ready for it. But a lot of times, if you start the conversation by asking the partner, what do you think? What do you think of this? You know, how do you feel about it? What's your relationship like? You get some clues in terms of how quickly you're either going to or really what some other issues are that you might, you know, you're just having the conversation that they've been having with themselves, you know, for a while, and looking then for a solution that's going to help them, but going to help the firm. I mean, I think that's the other thing is a lot of our lawyers are not comfortable having these conversations with the clients. And sometimes if you give them a way to have that conversation, help from our team, help from the client feedback team, that's a way of also bridging and, again, setting yourself as the subject matter expert within the firm.
I think just adding to that, I think my tip would be to try and make sure that it's done early, that you're having you're trying to have those conversations before it gets to the point where you've got the RFP in front of you, so that they know, so that you're encouraging partners, and it's particularly important with lawyers who tend to want to answer questions and rather than ask them. But if you're trying, what you're trying to do is make sure that they are having the right conversations with their clients, and they're thinking about, how do we want to position the firm? What is the sort of work that we want? Which are the clients that we want to work with, and how do we and what work's going to be most profitable for us? You want to make sure that those conversations aren't happening just at the RFP stage. You want to try and have that understanding across the whole firm, and then just apply it at the RFP stage, so that everybody knows this is the criteria we're going to use. And it kind of makes the whole thing a lot easier when you're then to saying, actually, this is going to wipe us out from loads of other work, so we're not interested, or we've done 15 of these before and they're all unprofitable, so we're not interested. You can make that conversation much more productive if it isn't the first time that you're having it.
Yes, and I guess just to pull up a couple of things that I think Karen and I guess you, Matthew, said earlier. One was to maybe not say no, it's no to some of it. I think that was one suggestion from that I heard from you, Karen, and then Matthew, that actually you're not going to get any assistance from us because we're busy doing other stuff, but here you go, you know, the tools are there if you want to respond yourself, knock yourselves out.
Just one more point on that. The lawyers welcome the challenge as well, though. They want to be challenged, and we shouldn't be afraid to do it. That is a key part of working out if this is one for us ultimately. That conversation has to be there. So
that has been, I hope, a really useful and valuable 40, 50 minutes. I want to say a really big thank you to Matthew, Evan, Keith, and Karen